And simultaneously, the prosecutor gets information from the defense attorney, and they can look and say, well, you know, we really have a weak case here. We're going to have to dismiss it. And they do. So that the justice system operates by getting plea bargains and dismissals on the basis of a fair exchange of information. And when you don't have that, then things really get screwed up. For instance, in the Carter case, the prosecution had exculpatory evidence pointing to the innocence of Mr. Carter, and they hid it. They didn't present it in court. And so that's ultimately, after 13 years in prison, why he finally got off, was on the basis of the prosecution not turning over material that they should have. He still may have been guilty, but because of this flaw in the prosecution's case, he never really was acquitted in the trial. It was just that the judge in the federal courts overturned the decision and and sent it back to the county prosecutor in Passaic County and said, you're either going to have to dismiss this case or retry him, and they chose not to retry him because he'd already had 2 trials. So that's, but in answer to your question, you know, I have a lot of respect for the European system, mainly based on disrespect for our system, I guess.
Permanent contempt of court.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned earlier that only about 5% of the cases that actually went to court, the 500 cases that funneled through the system and actually went to trial. Okay, but about 5% of them have independent counsel. So in other words, 95% have. So if we looked at the arrests, what would those figures be? In other words, if there's 5,000 people arrested, what percentage of them have independent counsel?
Just about 5%.
At the arrest level, there's only 5?
Early on,
I find that hard to believe, because I think of the numbers that funnel out, the 7,000 that get dropped out of the high percentage of those have, and I'm not suggesting that independent counsel is more competent counsel than.
Well, they're not independent, they're private.
Private counsel, right. But they're independent of the system.
Yeah.
So.
In terms of pay. And you can imagine why a defendant is skeptical about having a public defender, because two reasons, financial. One is the American adage, you get what you pay for, and if you're not paying for anything, then you're not getting much. The other is that, wait a second, where does the public defender get its money? From the state treasury. Where does the judge get its money? State treasury. Where's the prosecutor? County and state treasury. All these guys are getting paid out of the same trough. How much of an adversarial system can you have when everybody is getting paid by the same person or the same entity? But getting back to your question about
Private defense attorneys, the second book I wrote was entitled Criminal Lawyers and Endangered Species. And prior to the Gideon versus Wainwright case, if you were going to, the only chance you would have of having some kind of public defender or if you're an indigent, having some kind of lawyer was if you were arrested for a capital crime, or if there were certain special, unique circumstances like you were a juvenile. Those are the only times you'd have a private attorney. So all the other cases were handled by private attorneys. Then 1963, along comes Gideon saying, if you can't afford an attorney, we'll provide one for you. So 90% of the cases are involving indigents who are entitled to a private attorney. Private attorneys now have lost 90% of their business. And so I wanted to study what life was like for the remaining few private defense attorneys. That's why the book is called An Endangered Species. And they are endangered. They're probably one quarter are left from the private defense attorneys. What do? Well, they're basically litigators, private defense attorneys. And even when somebody identifies himself as a criminal lawyer, he may have, of his caseload, 20% of the cases may be criminal. He's basically a litigator. What else does he do? Negligence cases, matrimonial cases, any kind of cases that commonly wind up in the court. And that's what they do now. They've just shifted to 100% negligence in matrimonial rather than having, a quarter of them in criminal. And so there are very few legitimate criminal lawyers around. They just don't have that many cases. What kind of cases would you expect to involve a private criminal lawyer? They are cases which involve white-collar crime. They're cases, occasion.
A lot of those original arrests would be a fair number of white-collar crimes.
There's not that much. I mean, they make the headlines. One of the nicest things about being a public defender is that you live in obscurity. So nobody knows about your cases. They don't know all the cases you lose. They don't know the cases you win. These are cases that don't appear in the newspapers. So they can go along and have their practice and have a nice time in their office, and nobody knows. They live in obscurity. Whereas the big cases like the Madoff case and there was one case came out of Newark not too long ago, a couple of years ago. The person who worked in the church downtown who was murdered during the service, I believe it was, that case made the headlines. There was another case about the same time where a person waiting in line at the airport and got very angry, as sometimes you might, and he thought his wife was being physically mistreated by one of the people from the airlines, and he ran over and lifted the person up and dropped him on his neck and on his head, and he broke his neck, and was, that case got a lot of headlines. Last year or two, where they had 4 homicides in that schoolyard, that gets. But generally speaking, these other thousands and thousands of cases, a lot of times we form our opinions on rather idiographic, unique occurrences, not on. That's why I was giving you the flow of the funnel to really understand the way the typical case moves in our justice system.
The next question is from our cameraman.
Pull my pants up.
Yes, back in the 80s in the District of Columbia, I can't remember if it was 100% this way or partially, but they had a system whereby they paid private attorneys to act as public defenders on what the District of Columbia would be equivalent of the state court system. And as I recall back then, it was pretty robust. A lot of attorneys participated.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you were familiar with that system.
Yes, I am.
And how it works. How do you think it fits into the hierarchy?
They are a reform program, but they have a unique twist. Their public defenders are very well paid. It comes out of the federal government rather than the state. So they have no financial worries. And as a result of the prestige of the office and where it's located, they get a tremendous number of applicants. They have to sign on for 4 years as a contract. But the really unique thing is that the public defenders who are career and who handle most of the cases will only take the most serious cases, the top 20%, the most serious crimes, and the remaining 80%, they farm out to a list of private attorneys who volunteer, because there's a lot of young attorneys who need to make money. And so they get on this list, which is administered by the public defense attorneys, and all of the lesser felonies and misdemeanors, all those cases are handed off this list of private attorneys.